In 1781, a ship's crew straight up murdered over 130 men, women, and children by throwing them into the ocean. You're probably thinking pirates or an act of war, right? Nope, it was an insurance scam. This is the insane true story of the Zong Massacre, a mass murder for money that accidentally started the movement to end the entire slave trade. This story reveals the disgusting, purely business formula of the 18th century slave trade, an industry where human beings were just numbers on a page, with a cash value, and insured like a box of cargo. When the ship owners filed an insurance claim for their lost property, they had no idea they were about to expose the darkest secret of their business to a London courtroom. What happened next would shock everyone, challenge the actual legal definition of a human being, and launch one of the biggest social justice movements in history. This isn't just about one ship. This is about the moment an entire empire was forced to look in the mirror and see the horror that was making it rich. So, how does something this horrible even happen? To get it, you have to understand the insane business model. It's 1781, and the slave trade is a huge, global business making people unbelievably rich. A group of investors in Liverpool, led by a guy named William Gregson, were massive players in this industry. They had just bought a ship, the Zong. On September 6, 1781, the ship left the coast of Ghana with 442 enslaved Africans crammed into its hold. The craziest part? The ship was built to hold only half that many people. This wasn't a mistake. It was their business strategy. Packing more people onto the ship meant more profit, even though they knew for a fact many would die from disease and suffocation in the disgusting conditions. But this business had risks, like storms and disease, that could destroy their profits. So, the ship owners used another huge industry: insurance. These insurance policies were unbelievably grim. They would not pay out for enslaved people who died from natural causes, like sickness, from being packed into a filthy ship. That was just considered a business expense. But, if cargo had to be thrown overboard in an emergency to save the ship, that loss was covered by the insurance. The owners of the Zong had a policy that insured each African person for $30. It was a standard financial tool, but on this trip, that piece of paper would become the motive for mass murder. From the second it set sail, the Zong's voyage was a complete catastrophe. The captain, Luke Collingwood, was sick and had literally never commanded a slave ship before. The trip across the Atlantic was brutally slow. For months, the ship was a floating hell. Below deck, the 442 people were dying from disease and starvation. By late November, over 60 Africans and 7 crew members were already dead. Then, the captain made one of the biggest mistakes in sailing history. As they got close to the Caribbean, he confused the island of Jamaica for a totally different French island and sailed right past where they were supposed to go. By the time they figured it out, they were hundreds of miles off course and completely lost. This one screw-up turned a nightmare journey into a death sentence. They were now over 10 sailing days from the nearest port, and the ship's water supply was almost gone. According to the crew, they had only 4 days' worth of water left. Panic set in. Captain Collingwood and his officers had a choice. They could try to ration the water and pray for rain, knowing way more people would die of thirst. Or, they could find another way to cut their financial losses. And this is where the twisted logic of that insurance policy comes back. The people dying of sickness were a total financial loss, but if they were thrown overboard to save the ship, their deaths would suddenly be worth a lot of money. Facing his own catastrophic mistake, Cadix's Nandao, Sab Dame Spingen Ben, Guskavixor Duran Siren Strings Briskin was our Versor Bards. The story Dardal Dot Your Dard. Meaning, the decision they made was monstrous, but in the insane logic of the slave trade, it was also a great business move. If the sickest captives died of thirst, the owners got zero. But if the crew deliberately killed them to preserve the water supply, they could file an insurance claim. The argument was that it was better to kill the sickest people so the healthier ones and the crew would have enough water to live. They were turning mass murder into a necessity to save the ship and the rest of the cargo. This wasn't a quick decision made in a panic. It was a cold, hard business calculation. The enslaved people were worth $30 a head, but only if they were thrown overboard, not if they died from being sick. Court records show that the first mate, James Kelsall, actually argued against the plan at first, but was ignored. The order was given. The crew would start with the weakest and sickest people, the ones least likely to survive anyway, and throw them into the sea. They were about to liquidate their assets. On November 29, 1781, the killing began. The crew went below deck, brought up 54 women and children, dragged them to the side of the ship, and threw them into the Caribbean Sea. Chained and weak, they had no chance of survival. 2 days later, on December 1st, they did it again. This time, 42 enslaved men were brought up and murdered in the exact same way, and then, something happened that exposed their entire lie. It started to rain. Heavy rain hit the ship, and the crew collected 6 barrels of fresh water which completely ended the emergency. The necessity that was their only excuse was gone, but even with full water barrels they kept killing. After the rain, the crew threw another 36 people overboard. This proved it was never about survival. It was about hitting a number for a fraudulent insurance claim. In a final, unbelievable act of defiance, 10 of the African captives chose to jump into the sea themselves, choosing their own death instead of being murdered by the crew. In total, over those 3 days at least 132 innocent people were systematically drowned. When the Zong finally made it to Jamaica on December 22nd, only 208 of the original 442 captives were still alive. They were sold for an average of $36 each. The voyage was over. But the fight for the money was just getting started. The story of the Zong is one of the most chilling examples of how greed can literally make people inhuman. I know this is a tough piece of history, but it's so important that we don't forget it. If you believe these stories need to be told, do me a favor and smash that like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps make sure these events are never forgotten. When the news got back to the ship's owners in Liverpool, they felt zero remorse. They saw a huge opportunity. They filed an insurance claim for the loss of 132 enslaved people at $30 a head, for a total of almost $4,000, a ridiculous amount of money back then. The owners argued that the captain was forced to jettison cargo to save the ship. They presented it like it was a standard by-the-book emergency at sea. But the insurers were suspicious, not because they cared about the people who were murdered, but because they thought it was fraud. They argued the water shortage only happened because the captain was an idiot, and insurance doesn't pay for incompetence. So, the underwriters refused to pay. The ship owners, who were not about to lose their money, sued the insurance company. And in March 1783, the case went to trial in London. Now, this is where it gets completely insane. This was not a murder trial. No one was being charged with murder. It was a civil lawsuit, and the question was simple. Did the owners of the Zong get paid for the 132 human beings their crew had drowned? In the courtroom, the victims were only ever called property. Their lives were literally weighed against the profits of the ship. The first jury, made up of businessmen, thought this was totally normal. They ruled in favor of the slave traders and ordered the insurance company to pay them. The court had just made it legal to murder enslaved people for money, but the insurers appealed, and the case went to a higher court in front of one of the most powerful judges in England, Lord Mansfield. Even he was shocked, famously saying, "The case of slaves was the same as if horses had been thrown overboard." It is a very shocking case, and crucially, new evidence was presented. It had rained on the ship, giving them more than enough water. There was no necessity for the killings. On that technicality, Lord Mansfield overturned the verdict. The ship owners would not get their money. While the decision was about contract law, not murder, the trial had accidentally done something huge. It made the entire Zong Massacre public. While the lawyers were fighting over money, the story of the trial exploded across London. A formerly enslaved man named Olaudah Equiano, who had bought his own freedom, heard about the case and was horrified. He immediately ran to a famous anti-slavery activist named Granville Sharp. Sharp was furious. He didn't see an insurance problem. He saw mass murder. He launched a massive public campaign, writing letters to the Prime Minister, newspapers, and the government, demanding that the Zong's crew be prosecuted for murder. In his letters, he refused to use the legal term cargo, calling the victims human persons and the act willful murder. His attempt to start a murder trial failed. The legal system just wasn't ready to see enslaved Africans as human beings with a right to life. Not a single person from the Zong was ever punished for the killings. But Sharp and Equiano's campaign worked in a much bigger way. By publicizing the horrific details, they turned the Zong Massacre into the ultimate symbol of how evil the slave trade was. Before this, the horrors of these voyages were out of sight and out of mind for most people in Britain. But now, they had a case with a date, a ship, and a number. 132 people, deliberately killed for cash by a British crew, with a British court almost rewarding them for it. The Zong case lit a fire under the abolitionist movement. The story of the Zong became the abolition movement's most powerful weapon. Activists used it in every speech, pamphlet, and petition to Parliament. It was so barbaric it was impossible to defend. It proved their biggest point: any system that treats people as insurable property is completely evil. The pressure worked. In 1787, the Society for the Abolition of the Slave Trade was founded, with the Zong at the center of its campaign. Just 1 year later, Parliament passed its first-ever law regulating the slave trade, limiting how many people could be crammed onto ships, a direct response to the Zong. Then, in 1791, a law was passed that specifically banned insurance companies from paying out for enslaved people who were murdered by being thrown overboard. The loophole that created the Zong Massacre was officially closed. The momentum was now unstoppable. In 1807, the British Parliament passed the Slave Trade Act, completely abolishing the slave trade across the entire empire. While slavery itself wouldn't be abolished for a few more decades, this was a huge victory, and the memory of the 132 souls murdered on the Zong was a massive reason it happened. The story of the Zong is one of the darkest chapters in human history, showing how greed can completely erase humanity. It's a story where insurance policies and maritime law were used to justify mass murder for a paycheck. The court case wasn't about getting justice for the victims. It was about the profits of their killers. But it's also a story of insane consequences. In their greedy obsession for money, the slave traders accidentally showed the entire world how bankrupt and evil their business was. The case horrified a nation and gave the abolitionist movement its most powerful and undeniable symbol of evil. The 132 men, women, and children who were drowned were treated as nothing more than cargo. But their deaths helped start a movement that would eventually tear down one of the most brutal systems ever known. What part of this story did you find the most shocking? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to see more deep dives into the craziest events that shaped our world, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Thanks for watching. This is History Today, this day.